Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine, the podcast where we talk about complicated things and improve over time, just like wine does. Today we have Joey King with us, and if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube, you're going to see that Joey's screen is a little different than how we normally have our guests. He is a streamer, so he has a little avatar dude on the screen. But hi Joey, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, glad to be here. So yes, I'm a virtual streamer, and today I'd like to talk about the topic of, well, I guess it would be Western ethics. This is something I'm quite familiar with. I love studying it, and yeah, this is going to be a very conversational, interesting podcast. I guess to get started, I can name a bit about the topic. We can sort of touch upon what it is that we're going to be talking about here. So in terms of Western ethics, there are three main schools of Western ethics. There's consequentialism, specifically utilitarianism, but we'll separate that a bit later. Virtue ethics, right, and deontology. And all these are very important topics. All three of them are, can go into great detail, but these are the backbones of what we're going to be talking about. The first being utilitarianism, or specifically consequentialism. So consequentialism, right? It has the word consequence in it. So consequentialism basically means it focuses just on the consequences, right? What's good and what's bad is just on the consequences of the actions. But people might be more familiar with a specific type of consequentialism known as utilitarianism. Utilitarianism feels very natural. It's essentially basing one's morals on the actions that make the consequences that have the most happiness, the most utility, is what they like to call it. You would probably be familiar with utilitarianism. It's something we all practice every day. I myself have been a utilitarian probably several times this afternoon.
Can you give an example in case for people listening that, maybe aren't familiar or just kind of don't know off the top of their head?
Sure. So let's see. Say you wake up and you want to get some food, right? Whether you go to the Dunkin' Donuts or the deli, or you make your own food at home, whatever it is, you're going to choose the food that makes you the happiest, right? Mm-hmm. All other things disregarding. But even if you do include those other things, right, like the cost, the time to travel, all these are things that, you think, well, I could go out and get food. It's probably more convenient, but it's going to cost me more money than if I stay home and make food. And I'd be happier with the money than without the money. So maybe I should make food at home. It'll be happier for me. So it would feel very natural to make consequences. I think even starting at a young age, probably one of the first things people learn is the consequences of their action or what makes them feel happiest, right? Mm-hmm. You'll do things that are easier. You'll do things that make you, have more energy, that make you feel good, right? So whether that's the food you eat, the haircuts you choose to give yourself, the cars you choose to drive or not drive. Utilitarianism is probably the first thing people learn, whether they know it or not, about ethics. Maybe I should backtrack a bit. Ethics, in case people don't know, people might have an idea, but in case people don't know what ethics would be, ethics is basically from a branch of philosophy. It's essentially the study of what's right, what's wrong, and everything in between, what's good, what's evil. But philosophy is a lot more than just ethics. But we're just going to be talking about ethics, specifically Western ethics. And, maybe at some point, maybe we can talk about Eastern ethics. That's an interesting topic between the difference between Western ethics and Eastern ethics. But for now, utilitarianism, consequentialism, these are all very basic ideas that a lot of people learn from a very young age. So utilitarianism sounds nice, right? Like it sounds like how can utilitarianism be infallible? How is it that these actions that seem so natural, how can they be wrong? But utilitarianism and a lot of schools of ethics have a lot of fallacies in them, a lot of things that you would classically you have the example with the train, right? Like you got people stuck on a train. Do you pull the lever and derail the train to a different set of people or not, right? Mm-hmm. These rudimentary questions on ethics can all be solved. Well, not really solved, but they can all be explained based on what mode of ethics you want to follow, right? Mm-hmm. So let's touch upon the other two real quick. I mentioned deontology, right? So we discussed utilitarianism. Let's talk about deontology, about That'd be the second one I'd like to talk about. Deontology is essentially that ethics is based on your intentions, right? What you intend to do. Whether or not that makes people happier or not happier, or angry or not angry, it doesn't regard utility or happiness at all. It just regards a person's intentions, right? So if you're doing something good, it's only good if you have good intentions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's back that up with an example, right? So say you want to make a gift for a friend, right? That happens all the time, birthdays, special events, anniversaries, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make a gift for a friend. So what do, right? If you weren't a deontologist, you might just, this happens a lot more than I like to admit. Some people would just get a gift that they want, right? They give their friend not something that their friend would want, but something they would want, right? Whether, like, if they're a golfer, they might give them golf clubs to goad them into golfing with them. Whether or not the friend actually wants golf or likes golf, regardless, you would say that even though technically they have more utility, one might say that that was deontologically evil because they didn't have good intentions with that. They had selfish or even bad intentions, right? Whereas something that's deontologically ethical would be giving a gift that or rather you try to be a good gift, right? You're really putting the effort to make this a good gift. But this is slightly more nuanced because you might not always come into a scenario where you're like, well, I want to be deontological today, especially if you're not being conscious of it. Like unconsciously, utilitarianism is very natural, like, we've explained. But deontology is something you really have to think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know your opinions on that.
So deontology, to keep it, so there's a little bug in my face, to kind of put it in simpler terms, would you say it's basically kind of like the saying, like it's the thought that counts?
Exactly.
So, right.
That's a good heuristic.
Yeah. Like I've had experience with that where I've had friends buy me a gift, whether it's clothes, but it's a style that they like and they want me to dress a certain way because that's how they dress, but that's not really how I dress. And then it's like, oh, okay. But, like it's the thought that counts. So I like the example you brought up. I thought that was very relatable, especially right now at the time we're recording this. It's like the holidays and gifts and all that.
Right. People want to be very deontological. Yeah, during these festive seasons, I'd say.
Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think maybe subconsciously we're kind of innately guided that way? Do you think it's just because we like something, we assume everybody likes it, like a naiveness about it? Or do you think it's maybe kind of more because I like this, you should like this too, because I know what's best?
Okay, so you're asking me now, just so I get the question clearly. So you're asking me, why is it some people might not be deontologically ethical and give gifts that only they would want and not so much put the thought into other people's preferences, exactly, right? Whether it's
like in
clothing or games or whatever.
Right. Or, like maybe this has to be specifically on gifts, but, in your maybe research or your own perspective, why do you think people are kind of more innately guided that way?
Right. So in my opinion, the way I see it is it has to do with this little thing called empathy, right? Now, I don't want to sound like highfalutin. I don't want to sound like I'm being pretentious or anything like that. But empathy is a very complex emotion. It's a very complex understanding of emotions that requires a lot of thought. Some people, specifically empaths, can exhibit empathy passively without really trying to be empathetic. So many people have to try to be empathetic. Mm-hmm. It is something that they have to consciously do. So if you're an empath, you might just exhibit empathy passively, whether you want to or not. Mm-hmm. That's a great skill to have. Sometimes it could be a curse. I myself consider myself an empath. And I know many times I would not like to feel what the other person's feeling. Not because I don't want to be, rather it's because what they're feeling is very, very horrible and I don't want to feel bad, right? Like, when someone cries, you cry. Someone feels bad, you feel bad. You can be there for them, but, sometimes it can be draining when you're just surrounded by people that are constantly, what's the word? They're like sad sacks. They constantly just bring you down.
Energy vampires.
Exactly. Being an empath in that scenario could be very draining for the empath, unfortunately. So sometimes you don't want to be an empath, but for many, many people, empathy is something that they need to practice and actively do. So a lot of people don't want to do that because it takes time, it takes energy, it takes skill. Empathy is a skill, right? People have to learn to be better empaths if they want to be better deontologists. They want to be better at relating with their fellow person. So I think that's what it is. They go out, they buy gifts, and they're like, well, I already spent money, I already spent time, and I already spent energy buying the darn gift. Why do I need to spend my emotional energy picking a gift that they would like? Why do I have to spend all these things I'm already spending? Why do I have to spend more on this gift? Why do I have to spend my emotional energy being an empath and picking a good gift? Well, the reason is because for the same money, time, and energy, you could make them so much more happier. Now we're getting into utilitarianism, right? Happiness comes up again. For that little bit of empathic energy, you can make their gift so much more better. They would feel so much more, it'd be so much more memorable for them and so much more fulfilling for them if they got a gift that they would actually enjoy, as opposed to something you think they would enjoy. It doesn't cost anything in terms of money to be an empath. It just takes a little bit of training. So that, in my opinion, is why that specific scenario happens, where people would essentially, buy things that other people might not care about, or do things even other people might not care about, because they aren't trained, or maybe even don't want to be trained in empathy.
Yeah, I think it also kind of connects to whether people have, EQ, emotional intelligence, if they're kind of like self-aware about where they stand, whether like empathetic or not, or just, thinking more on the other person versus kind of where they're at. I would also identify as an empath, and you brought, like, I like how you said, you might have that skill whether you are trying to have the skill or not. It's just something you innately do, and sometimes it can kind of feel more like a curse, depending who you're with, like depending who you're surrounding with. Like, it can kind of be a lot, but I think that, to me, I would say that makes a lot of sense, whether someone knows how to use their skill of empathy versus people that need to work on it more.
Right, exactly. So there's one last, school of thought in terms of Western philosophy that we haven't touched upon, and that would be virtue ethics. So virtue ethics, essentially, the way I understand it, is that it is the philosophy, it's the ethics that what is right is what makes you a better person, and what is wrong is what does the opposite, what makes you a worse person. So, you could think of this colloquially as, don't steal because it would make you a thief, or it would make you not respect other people's belongings. Don't lie because it would make you a liar, or it would make you not respect the truth. Right? Mm-hmm. These are things. This would be the mindset of a virtue ethicist, a person who follows virtue ethics. I can never think of the word. It's deontology and deontologist, utilitarian, utilitarianist, virtue ethics, virtue ethicist.
Yeah,
it's really confusing. But regardless, there's a lot to learn if you really delve deep into, the three schools of virtue ethics. Now, I don't think I mentioned which one I specifically follow, but from the way I explained it. Oh, and did you have any questions about virtue ethics?
Not questions specific to that, but I was about to ask you which one do you follow, and kind of wanted to pick your brain on how you got there. But I guess that transition's perfect. I'll pass the ball to you.
Okay, right before we do that, I want to know yours, because I don't want to be biased and be like, well, I'm a this, and then you be biased, well, I'm also a that. So I'm curious what yours is. I know what mine is, and I'm not going to change it until I get more information. But from what I've explained, tell me the school you think you follow the most.
It's a very good question.
Let me give you a quick recap. Utilitarian's the first one. That's what's good is what makes you happy. There's deontology. What's good is what you're is trying to do good, right? Like your intentions are good. And virtue ethics is what's good is what makes you a better person.
I think off the top of my head, just based on the conversation, I probably would be more aligned with virtue ethics.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, I think just innately, that's what feels more right with me. But maybe as we have this conversation, I learn a little bit more, my mind might switch. I'm also the type of person where I always see both sides. So usually when it comes to different stuff, I'm always kind of somewhere in the middle because I always find something from here or here that I identify with or that I agree with. So I'm curious to see maybe towards the end of this conversation if I change my mind or if I feel more aligned with virtuous ethics. But I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, so me, I consider myself a deontologist,
Mm-hmm.
or deontology, essentially. Um, and I guess we can discuss how I came to that conclusion. Now, each of these are very complex theories, and lots of people switch between all three, or maybe even go into Eastern philosophies, or maybe even find a blend of, whatever's convenient and whatever's most available to them. But to me, deontology, because the thing is, the way I came about it is I found all the things that I found wrong about every single type of philosophy. And I thought, well, deontology right now probably has the closest to the least number of fallacies or things wrong with it. It's not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty close. If anything, I would say I'm not like a full deontologist. I'm like a deontologist mixed with some other things that kind of spread it around a bit,
Yeah.
but mostly deontology. So I guess we can start with utilitarianism, and some of the issues with utilitarianism. So some of the issues with utilitarianism is that it's not just your happiness, or rather, to be specific, depending on which school, because there are many, many different types of utilitarianism, right? But say we talk about just globally, what we mean is that utilitarian focuses on everyone's happiness, everyone in the world's happiness, or really, everyone who might just be around you who's of consequence, right? Like, let me see here, right? Like if the price of food changes in a town, it's really only going to affect the people in that town, right? So
Mm-hmm.
with utilitarianism, one of the issues is that it falls into something that a lot of consequentialism falls into, and that is popular ethics. Popular ethics is another school of philosophy that isn't as prominent as the three I just mentioned, but some people follow popular ethics. In fact, it's very natural to follow popular ethics. So let me explain it a bit. Popular ethics says that what is most popular is right? So it's basically entirely democratic, right? So
Yeah.
if everyone wanted a thing, whatever it is, that thing would be right. Now, that seems natural, right? That seems fairly intuitive for people like you and me, but you can start to see that there might be many, many problems with following that train of logic. If everyone wanted a bad thing, that bad thing would be right, regardless of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, we could probably name all kinds of times in history where following popular ethics didn't result or didn't have what was actually right, but rather it just followed what everyone wanted to, right?
Right.
You could think of like, I don't know, Nazi Germany. You could think of like I forget the name of it. The name of that psychology book. Is it DSV?
Oh, the DSM.
The DSM,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could think of like the DSM. I think it was 3. From 3 and before that, there were several issues regarding sexuality that at the time was popular, so that's why they put it in. But looking back on it, it's not because it was popular that it was wrong. It was because it was wrong that it was wrong.
Right.
So, utilitarianism falls into these same kinds of problems as popular ethics, because it's not that it was popular that people wanted it. It's because that's what made them happy, or rather, it's what made them not unhappy. And there were enough people, and it was popular enough that, they said, okay, let's just do this that we think is right because it makes us the most happy or the least unhappy. Those both might seem like the same thing, but they're actually very dissimilar. So in terms of utilitarianism, there's two main, see, it branches and it branches and it branches like a tree. In terms of utilitarianism, there's two main ways you could look at it: positive and negative utilitarianism. Positive utilitarianism essentially says happiness is what's most important. Negative utilitarianism says avoiding unhappiness and pain and death is what's most important. Sometimes these clash. Sometimes you have to choose between whether you want to be a positive or a negative utilitarianist.
Mm-hmm.
But they both fall into those same issues of it really is just what's most popular is what's right. Because people will, as a crowd, people will naturally choose what makes them happy, right? Or avoids unhappiness. one of the two. But that doesn't mean it's right. It just means it's popular at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the issues with utilitarianism, is that it follows a lot of popular ethics, usually. And there's many, many more issues I found with utilitarianism. So I decided I don't really want to be a utilitarianist. It feels natural to be a utilitarianist. And sometimes I do things that make me happy, but I don't, I wouldn't say I'm a utilitarianist. Like, I pick the food that makes me happy, but if the food makes me happy requires, like, okay, for example, Nestle. Are you familiar with Nestle?
Mm-hmm.
So, Nestle is infamous for being a very sort of immoral kind of company. So even if you like Nestle products, even if I like Nestle products, I'll avoid them. Even if it makes me happy, even if it's convenient, right? I'll try to actively avoid them because I don't care about my happiness. I care about what's doing what's right, regardless of whether it makes me happy or someone else happy or whatever. So that's why I avoided utilitarianism. So next would be virtue ethics. Virtue ethics isn't bad. And I would say I mix some aspects of virtue ethics. But the problem with virtue ethics is sometimes it's a little vague.
Okay. All right, lay it on me.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that, okay, so it doesn't necessarily tell you what is good. You kind of have to decide what is good. And they don't explain what happens should those things clash. So let me give you an example. Being honest is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
People would naturally say, yeah, being honest is a virtue I'd like to have. Okay, how about being nice? Being nice is a virtue, right? People want to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like something one would incorporate with virtue ethics. But what happens when they clash? When you have to choose between being honest and being nice?
Mm-hmm.
What does virtue ethics say is the best thing to do? Well, that's the thing. It doesn't, right? So you're left in this vague area, this nebulous zone where, and for a specific concrete example, if you had to choose between being honest and being nice, one example would be, say you had to tell a friend something. Would you tell them nicely or would you tell them honestly? If you tell them nicely, you might avoid some of the more, mean or crude comments that might be entirely honest.
Mm-hmm.
But, you would spare their feelings, of course. Or do you go brutally honest, let them have all the information that they may need to know? They won't be missing any information, but at the same time, it'll be extremely mean. So what do you choose?
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, that's not the only example. Like, there are many examples. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no. I was going to say, I've had to have situations like that a lot where you need to be totally honest, but how do you deliver the blow in a way where it's not going to demolish them or just be, unnecessarily blunt. So damn, that's a good one. Okay, what other examples do you have?
Okay, so for virtue ethics, right? Say you had to pick between, let me think of two random virtues. Okay, being prudent. And also another thing about virtue ethics is that it doesn't necessarily tell you what is a virtue, right? You could take something, like two sides to a coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could take something and say it's bad, and you could flip it, say it's good, right? So let's take being prudent, right? Being prudent sounds like a virtue, right? Being honest with your money, being very knowledgeable about your resources. Well, where do you draw the line between, like how do you know when you stop being prudent and you start being greedy, or you start being selfish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or start hoarding, right? Where do you know where you draw the line? You could just say, oh, I'm just being prudent. But that's the thing. These words are kind of a spectrum, right? Where one person sees greedy or selfish, another person would say it's prudent. Virtue ethics doesn't tell you where exactly we draw the line, right? You could just say you're just being prudent. You're just working on yourself and being, conscious of your resources and your money. Someone else will say, no, you're hoarding, you're being selfish, you're being greedy. So without knowing where exactly the line is, virtue ethics leaves you in this very nebulous zone. Mm-hmm. Although it does sort of vibe with deontology in that with virtue ethics, it is about the intentions, right? Mm-hmm. But it's just about your intentions, right? Mm-hmm. Because with virtue ethics, you're doing it because you want to be a better person. That's definitely good intentions, I'd say. So that would be some of the issues I saw with virtue ethics. Now, not to leave myself like perfect or anything. Deontology itself also has many issues that I acknowledge, but even with the issues it does have, I think I would still follow deontology. Um, but I think there's still a lot to be learned about, different types of ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, and of course, virtue ethics. So one of the problems with deontology is very similar to virtue ethics. It doesn't say what good intentions are, right? Like, let me see. Now we get to sort of minutia examples that might be not very day to day and very kind of specific. Um, okay, so say someone walks up to you and says that they have bad intention or they're going to do something horrible to somebody, right? Um, how do you address them? You'd probably want to lie to them. You'd probably want to, get them off of their path or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very convenient. It's very conventional to like have to sort of lie your way through it, but that would be bad intentions. Or is it good intention? Could it be that you had good intentions all along, but you just had to lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because it doesn't tell you what good intentions are, you kind of just have to make it up. And if you can make it up, you get a lot of leeway as to what you can really say are quote unquote good intentions. Because there are no hard and fast good intentions. If you just have to make it up, you could do anything and say you have good intentions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. Let me think of something. An example. Okay, say you own like a shop, like a food shop, a deli, or an ice cream parlor, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone, and you see someone, they come into your shop and they order some food, right? And then you knowingly give them less food than what they ordered, right? You're skimming them off, right? You could say, oh, I'm trying to help them lose weight. I have good intentions. Well, you can argue that. And if if you follow deontology, it would be hard to argue against that and say, no, those are bad intentions, because there's no way to prove intentions. There's no like intention machine. Yeah, you got lie detector test, polygraph test, but there's no provable way to say, oh, those were bad intentions. You just kind of have to take their word for it. If you take their word for it, that kind of opens up a lot of, because like I said before, you can do anything and say, oh, that was good intentions, but there's no really way to prove it. It's just the honor system. It's just up to the person to say, I truly, genuinely had good intentions, as opposed to, oh, I was just trying to gyp them off their food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are all very like interesting and very complex ideas that a person can ruminate on. So given I've sort of tore down a bit of each school of thought, each school of ethics that are very prominent in Western philosophy, how would you say your ethics are now?
In terms of which one I would identify with, or like just
Yeah.
I think I'm probably still gonna have to say I feel more aligned with virtue ethics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair.
I think with deontology that makes sense too. And maybe it was just the way I was understanding it. But I think the part where there's still kind of missing parts of, what do you determine is ethical or not, and you kind of have to decide and figure out for yourself. I think maybe if there was like combining virtue ethics with deontology, it would probably fit like a better mold, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see what you mean. So again, these are all fields that are kind of still being studied, that are being branched out more and more and more and more, right? You have positive utilitarianism, negative utilitarianism, and you have different schools of deontology and virtue ethics as well. And virtue ethics binds very well with Eastern philosophies. Like a lot of Eastern philosophies feel a lot like virtue ethics, like Taoism. I'm not too familiar with Taoism, but from what I do know, I have some rudimentary knowledge of Taoism, it feels a lot like virtue ethics, but I'm sure there's great differences between the two. So, we talked a bit about ruminations, we talked a bit about ethics. I'd like to know a bit about mindfulness, because, someone can rack their brain for hours and hours and hours just thinking about this. But if you don't have mindfulness, you don't really have a very balanced mindset, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could tell me a bit about mindfulness, because me, I'm very I have very I have very like common knowledge about mindfulness.
Yeah. Again, I'm no expert, so people listening, double check your facts and do your own research. But based from what I've learned in therapy, from people on the podcast, and just things I've learned over the past 2 years, it's ways you can be mindful, I think, is ties along with just being self-aware and knowing, okay, we're like self-regulating. What are your coping mechanisms? So, for someone that ruminates, that's probably rooted with like some type of anxious habits, or, like your anxious attachment style, or, you just teeter more that way. You're probably someone that is just having these thoughts on replay, repeat, just going back and back and back. And like, I used to be that way. So from my personal experience, I would have these ruminating thoughts, and the thoughts would just continue and never stop. And then I would be stuck in this mental pattern of whatever the topic was, if it was like I failed a test, or, this person is not talking to me. You just go back and back on that. And instead of being self-aware of how you're feeling and just, okay, why am I feeling this way? You let the thoughts just kind of take over, and then you can go on some thought train, which ends up leading to anywhere. So with mindfulness and things I've learned in therapy is, being self-aware. Okay, so why are you feeling anxious? Why is this thing bothering you? If you're depressed, like, what is the root cause of that? Is it something from childhood or trauma, or is it something just now present that's just you're concerned, anxious about the future, you're depressed about the past? And then learning how to bring yourself into this present moment, because like then with like anxiety, you're anxious about the future, versus depression is usually something about the past, but you're not in the present. And so with mindfulness is kind of just learning how to bring yourself grounded into what is going on now. Where are you at? And some exercises I've learned through therapy is there's one where you use your 5 senses. And so for me, this helped a lot, especially if like I'm having an episode like panic attack, or I'm ruminating and I'm just kind of going off into some little like thought train. Yes, yeah, like I'm just like in a whole nother planet. Yeah. So the 5 sensory thing, what you can do is, okay, what is something that you can see, something you can hear, that you can smell? Can you taste anything? Is there anything you can feel? So you're having to physically go through things that are around you at this current time. And that kind of helps you detach from whatever mentally else is going on, and just to kind of ground you. Breath work is another one that you can use, of just helping your heart rate just get more regulated, and just learning how to kind of let thoughts come in and out. That's not also a big thing, I think, with mindfulness is, especially with we're going to use the example again, ruminating. You let the thoughts stay in your head, but when you're practicing mindfulness, we have a bunch of thoughts all day, every day. It's really hard to ever be in a place where you have no thoughts. Some people with yoga, if they've been practicing for a long time, they can get there. But usually they're still going to have a thought pop into their head. But what they do, being intentional about it, they let the thought come and let it leave. Like, okay, I acknowledge what popped into my head. All right, we'll address that later. And so I think with mindfulness is just having to really learn how to be present. Whether, like let's say with work, maybe like with you streaming, like you have a bunch of deadlines coming up and maybe you're getting overwhelmed, right? Like same with the podcast. I have a bunch of episodes I need to edit. I'm getting overwhelmed. And then it almost puts me in a place where I'm turned off and I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to take a break. But then I have to bring myself, be mindful, like, okay, one thing at a time. So like, okay, we're recording this now. All right, maybe tomorrow I'll edit an episode, add it to queue, upload it. Then next week it'll be live. It's just learning how to compartmentalize everything and just take it one step at a time.
That's right. So me, so that was actually very insightful for me because it taught me, like what you just said, taught me a few new things about mindfulness. Because like I said, I am very kind of new and amateur to this. Like the thing with the five senses, that's a new bit of information I'm going to store in the vault. But maybe I can explain like my journey through mindfulness because I feel like
Yeah.
I am coming from a very sort of a normal perspective. Because from my understanding, mindfulness is sort of a very new type of non-traditional type of healing people, right? Or rather, healing yourself. It's very similar to a very tertiary way of medicine, or rather, preventative medicine, right? You have
Yeah.
tertiary medicine, which is preventative medicine, which is preventing you from getting sick in the first place, is the most effective, cheapest, and probably the best thing you can do for yourself, preventing yourself from getting sick in the first place. And one of the things that come from that is mindfulness. So mindfulness is a very, very sort of new concept that I feel like a lot of people are still trying to comprehend and study and really understand how important it really is. Now, for me, I know about mindfulness for a while. It popped up here and there. I saw it in news articles. I didn't understand what it was. It just sounded like a new word to me, mindfulness, like, oh, just be mindful. But no, it's a lot more than that, actually. And it's actually very important because I was a big time ruminator. And for me, ruminating, I almost kind of enjoyed ruminating because it helped me really work out my thoughts, even if sometimes you just end up going in a circle and a circle and a circle. And then you're walking around your room and then you just leave like a groove in the ground from like walking in circles thinking, no. You want to be mindful. So I guess I could talk a little bit about some of the articles I read about mindfulness.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, so I remember I was in school and I read this article that apparently too much ruminating causes it causes things later down in life with your brain, things like Alzheimer's, things like overall forgetfulness, and things like that. So I thought that's horrible. Like I don't like, is there something I can do about it? And like, yeah, studies have found that mindfulness helps with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, I ruminate way too much, right? I ruminate way too much. If I like keep ruminating like hours and hours a day, I'm gonna start getting forgetful, right? So I was like, okay, let me practice some mindfulness. This seems like something I could really sink my teeth into, kind of like what I usually do, right? Like when I find an interesting topic, I really like to delve deep in it. That's kind of where the ruminating comes from. So with mindfulness, I started like really going into it. Like, okay, what can I do? It's like, okay, you got to be in the present. Don't think about ruminating thoughts. Don't think about things that are going to be bugging you in the future for now, right? Just focus on where you are, right? I'm sitting at my desk, got my microphone in front of me, got my computer on. Okay, that's where I am. So right now, I've done some very amateurish mindfulness, but there's a lot more to it, kind of like what you described, right? I can describe what I'm smelling right now. My nose is a little stuffed, unfortunately, so I can't smell anything. But I tasted a bit of the yogurt I had earlier. How do I feel? Well, it's not cold where I live. So it's just kind of always a little warm. So, I'm just feeling very comfy right now. Let me see if I can practice this. It's what you see, right?
So something you're seeing.
Something I'm seeing, right? I see my monitor, see my camera all set up. Something I smell, not much stuff. Taste the yogurt, right? And something let me see.
You can feel. So like for me, it would be my sweater. For me, it would be my chair.
Right. I got my chair. I got my mouse. My plastic. Click.
Something you're hearing, maybe my voice, the fan going on, your computer fan.
My computer fans are going, and I just practice a bit of mindfulness. Now, preventative medicine includes, both the traditional and the non-traditional. So I do take some vitamin B12 as well. I hear that's very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so my mindfulness journey started a bit from a place of ignorance where I didn't really know what it was, and it just sounded like another word to me. And now it's something I'm very much interested in because I'm very conscious about my health, and preventative medicine is some of the best ways in which you can, keep yourself healthy, right? It isn't something you do when you're sick. It's something you do when you're still healthy.
Mm-hmm. And so for some context for you, because since you brought up preventative medicine and health, I'm starting my master's in positive psychology, and that's really focused on the preventative side. So, and the analogy that I would use, like therapy, would be similar to a physical therapist, where you have an injury and you're trying to get better. You're trying to get back to normal baseline. So you go see a physical therapist, get healed, get fixed, and then there you go, you're back to normal. Versus someone that's, doing positive psychology or even like a life coach, they're similar to a personal trainer. So you're already normal baseline, you're not injured or anything, but you want to get stronger, you want to build upon wherever you're at. So that focuses more on your strengths, that focuses more on like the resiliency aspect, focuses on, things from your past. How do we make sure we give you tools that way you're not in the place where you're ruminating, you're anxious, depressed, you're sick. Like we're learning like all the mindfulness tips that you need to do. That way you're set and you don't ever have to feel like you're at a place where you need to go get fixed, quote unquote.
I see. That's interesting. So from the sounds of it, it sounds like there's a little bit of a crisis where people are sort of on the fence of being from their baseline to being in a sort of negative mental state and being in a positive mental state. So you're saying with this positive psychology, we'll get the population off that fence and get them more in the positive mental state. So that way, if anything happens, they won't drop so far off their baseline that they're going to need like emergency psychology or something like that.
Yeah, it's and it's not at all to like, wipe out therapists, because typically you would go see a therapist first, and then from there you can see a life coach that does positive psychology, or if you want to learn positive psychology, you can learn tools that way. But it's really meant to like, let's give you the tools, that way we can prevent you from ever going back to the negatives.
I see. So that's actually kind of interesting in how it ties back into ethics, because like the act of preventative medicine is something that you don't see the dividends of until the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you could look at it from a utilitarianistic perspective and say, well, we have preventative medicine to prevent unhappiness in the future, right? Because, these kinds of things require research. It requires people to go out and see what works and see what doesn't work. See what we can do with mindfulness, what we can't do with mindfulness, what we can do with other things, what we can't do. All this research and development takes, time, money, resources, but we're doing it to prevent unhappiness in the future, right? That's, if you look at it from that perspective, from a utilitarianist perspective, that's why we have things like preventative medicine coming up. If you look at it from the deontologist perspective, it's saying, well, we need preventative medicine because the people that do it because they have good intentions, because they want to keep people from, being unhealthy, whether mentally or physically, right? So we're doing it because of the people that are passionate in it. We do it for the people that want to help people, right? It's all good intentions all around. And finally, for virtue ethics, it says, well, we do it because we as a species are good people. We're smart people. We're doing it to advance humanity, right? Like preventative medicine is sort of this sort of new field, right? Like for the longest time, we have been very sort of primarily focused, right? Like, oh, your arm is destroyed, cut it off, right? That's very like primary medicine, right? Like what's the phrase I'm thinking of? Like in the emergency room, like, right? Like you need to be healed like now.
Right.
Whereas opposed to preventative medicine, that's this sort of new kind of thing showing up, where it's like, okay, we're at a state where not everyone needs primary care instantly. So let's take this time, this energy, and these extra resources to keep them from getting sick, either mentally or physically, or maybe even spiritually. That should be interesting. I'm sure a lot of people have very interesting thoughts about that. But regardless, virtue ethics will say we do it because as a species, we want to enhance ourselves. This is something we're doing to enhance our technology, to enhance our health, to enhance us as a society. So from all three perspectives, they say do it. Virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarianism, they all say it's good. It's something you want to pursue, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So, all all three main schools of ethics don't usually agree on stuff. But when they do agree on stuff, it's usually because it's the right thing to do. And I think it's always interesting to see it from other people's perspective, people that might follow other philosophies. It's a very, very interesting thing meeting new people because they always have new experiences, new bits of nuggets of truth that they can equally share with each other with open discussion like this.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about conversations like this. Like I've learned very little on like Stoicism, ethics in class, during college, but I never really on my own took the time to do a lot of research and read on it. So hearing you, share everything that you shared today, it's like, okay, like I have a much better understanding. And now it's like, okay, I'm going to be thinking about, okay, ethics, what happiness, good, how does this all tie into the day to day? And then, you learning a little bit more on what I have to share with mindfulness. Again, I'm no professional people, so sorry if I butchered some stuff, but, at least you can like the different senses, if you're ever in a place where you're ruminating and you just need to be grounded, like, oh, okay, that's something you can practice. It's cool. It's nice to just have conversations and meet new people where it's just an open platform and I learned something, you learned something. We're just sharing the knowledge. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So funny thing you brought that up. We had a very similar experience. So I learned a lot about like ethics and mindfulness and preventative medicine in school. I took a lot of medical classes and stuff like that, a lot of science classes. And they taught us these things, but it wasn't until I meet people that practice it that I really learn it. Because they teach you it rudimentary and they're like, read this book about it and we'll give you this test about mindfulness. I'm like, okay. And then I learn it and then I instantly forget it. But it's not until I meet someone that's like really passionate about it that I like really start to learn, this is why it's important. This is why I have to know it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think it's important to speak to people from all different walks of life. Because you learn a lot better through experience and from people that have experience than from just like, reading it yourself or being forced to read it for a test or something like that.
Right. There's just something about, like you said, where you're hearing someone being very passionate about whatever it may be, and they're sharing this with you. And I think, at least for me, when I've heard friends or just strangers through the podcast or whatever, they share something they're really passionate about and I'm learning. I think for me, what really helps grind it in is because now I'm having this experience with them where I'm experiencing like secondhand excitement from them versus class. It's just like, okay, I have an assignment. All right, let me just put this in the brain dump. That way I can get this A and then make room for something else to have a quiz on.
So I would say that's probably empathy. You're empathizing with their excitement, and excitement plus learning reinforces the learning. So it makes you excited to learn. Or as opposed to like, sometimes the teacher, like, okay, if the teacher's into it, if the teacher's like really enthusiastic, I learn a lot better. But that's like not really par for the course. Usually you tend to find kind of very burned out teachers. And that's like a whole different discussion on teacher burnout and things like that. But in my experience, I find a lot of burned out teachers and professors and stuff like that. I had this one professor and it was crazy. Like they asked us to send in the homework, but like through snail mail for some reason, right? They wouldn't accept it digitally. They wouldn't accept it in class. You had to mail the professor the homework every time. And it was like, what even is this? And they were just so, I don't know, they were just so burned out. They were just so nonchalant that it was just so difficult to, like me as an empath, it was so difficult for me to stay energized because they would always be bringing me down while teaching.
Mm-hmm.
But I had this one physics teacher that was, now physics is, it was definitely hard when I learned it. It's definitely still hard now. But he was so into physics. He was the guy when it comes to physics. He would jump around the classroom. He would like bring a bunch of stuff. He let the students teach if they knew enough. He'd like, you go up and teach the class. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And he was so enthusiastic that he got us all like excited to learn physics. Great guy, great teacher. But I would say in that scenario where we're caught in a very interesting sort of clash of ethics here, right? Mm-hmm. Because being a teacher is a lot of times a very selfless thing to do, right? You're devoting a lot of your time, you don't get a lot of recognition, and you're doing it for the future, right? A lot of times you're not teaching for yourself, you're teaching for, your students, right? It's a very selfless thing to do. But if you look at it from a deontological perspective, they would say you have to kind of do it, but from a place of good intentions, right? So you need to come into class and not only want to teach them, but have good intentions for your students, right? Good intentions for the students could be things like, wanting them to do good, wanting them to learn, wanting them to be happy in class. That could be a major issue for you if you're a deontological teacher, right? A teacher who happens to be a deontologist.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from a utilitarianistic perspective, right? If you're happy, that's good, right? So, be happy. But, making your students happy might be more important because there's many, many students, only one of you. If you can make all your students happy, that would be even better than just making yourself happy. You would have to be even more selfless than you were before. But that's a different kind of take on teaching from a utilitarianistic perspective. And finally, I guess, virtue ethics, of course, right? So virtue ethics would look at teaching almost entirely as a good thing because, one, it's selfless, right? Whether or not you're motivated or not, it's pretty much always a selfless act to be a teacher, especially in this day and age. But also, you're teaching, you're being a mentor. Being a mentor itself could be a virtue. So depending on which school of Western thought you think about it, being that sort of burned out, not really caring teacher could still be a good thing, right? Like, for example, so if you're a very enthusiastic teacher, like my physics teacher was, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be very good for, utilitarianism and deontology. Whereas on the flip side, it would still be okay, but it wouldn't be mandatory for virtue ethics, essentially.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very interesting thought on how people manage teaching. Because sometimes you get the teachers that don't really care and have all these weird rules you got to follow that don't enhance the learning experience. Anything, they deter the learning experience, but you have to do it anyway because it's the rules. And then you have, the more fun-loving teachers that really hammer home because I empathize with their energy. I empathize with how enthusiastic they are with teaching it. Even if it's a subject I don't like, even if it's a subject I don't know anything about, me empathizing with their enthusiasm makes me learn it better because their enthusiasm plus learning reinforces what they're learning.
Yeah, and that, like you said, that really just ties down to us being empaths. I didn't think about it that way, but that makes so much sense. Yeah,
that's exactly how I interpreted it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No. And that goes back to, you're being empathetic without even trying. And sometimes it's not even like you're trying to want to be that way. It just happens. But yeah, too many times where I've had professors where you can tell they do not care. They rather be somewhere else. And you don't learn.
It makes me feel like I want to be somewhere else too.
Right. It's like, well, if I'm going to teach myself this class, then why am I here?
Exactly.
Versus you have the teachers, they actually care about the students. Obviously, you're not really doing it for the money, but they're there because they want to make an impact and they just love teaching and mentoring. And I think the same you can go into with the medical fields, like doctors and all that, just different professions where you're not serving, not catering. Maybe you have a better word for me, but professions like that where you can really tell, are you here because you care? Or are you here whether it's the paycheck or because it's what's convenient for you right now?
Right. It's very interesting because a lot of people have trouble finding what it is that they want. And I would say it's mainly because they just don't have a lot of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more information you have, the better you are at knowing what it is you want, right? Like before this, you probably made many, many decisions today without really thinking, well, does this follow with my philosophy, with my ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not always conscious about my decisions either. But the fact that I have the information means I can be conscious of it, right? So next time I make a decision, next time I'm reaching for something to buy, next time I'm going to go get a haircut, if I make a big decision like buy a car or something like that, these things are gonna pop up, right? Like, what should I pick? Should I buy from Nestle? It's convenient and it's cheap and it tastes good, but like it supports a company that I myself don't condone. Or
Mm-hmm.
do I, take a less happy approach? For me, it might give me a little less convenience and happiness, but it follows better with my ethics. So being conscious of these things, knowing what you want with the information that you have, can help reduce the amount of ruminations you do, because you're not going to be like, oh man, I made a big mistake, or I did something that was wrong, or I should have helped that person but I didn't help them, or I should have not helped that person that I should have helped, yada yada yada. All these like regrets um can be tamed if you know what you want, right? If you have the information to know what you want. Um, like, one thing, for example, Stoicism you brought up, I think is very interesting. I wouldn't really consider Stoicism an ethics. To me, it's more of like an ideology or like a philosophy or something like that. The
Mm-hmm.
Stoicism to me doesn't feel like it tackles the goods and the evils. To me, Stoicism deals more with the areas in between, where it's like it's better for you to live your life this way, but you don't have to, essentially, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
like to me, for Stoicism, it's better to live a Stoic life, but Stoicism for me doesn't tell me things I have to do, things I'm morally mandated to do, and things I'm morally mandated not to do. For me, it's more like, if you had a choice between, being Stoic or being not Stoic, be Stoic, right?
Right.
So I'm curious how you define Stoicism from your understanding of it.
I think I'm trying to find a good way that I would phrase it, just because again, I'm not the most familiar, but kind of I guess what how you said it's for me, I've always just pictured it's almost like suggestions or guidelines of how to live your life the most stoic, of course, but maybe most effective, if that's the right word to use. It's just like if you, especially if you read books by Stoics, it's just all very much like in this situation or this, think this type of way. Like don't think this way because it's not as productive for yourself, or it's not as healthy. Um, I guess in my not very effective way of saying it, that's kind of my understanding of how I would describe it.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of like as I said before, with the guidelines of Stoicism. Um, to me, there's a lot of misconceptions about Stoicism that I feel kind of need to be cleared up, because um, people need to have the right information. People might be turned
Mm-hmm.
off to Stoicism if they feel like they don't know it fully, if they think like it's something else rather than it actually is. For one, right, like me, I love clearing up the misconceptions about Stoicism because there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
One being that Stoics don't show emotion, or you're not allowed to show emotion for Stoicism. That I do not believe is actually true.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Stoicism, and this has to do with philosophy and in some aspects ethics, because for me the philosophies of Stoicism matter everything in between the middle of what you're mandated to, what you're not mandated to do. So with Stoicism, you're allowed to show emotion, but what you really want to focus on is the control of your emotions, right?
Like self-regulating.
Exactly. Don't
Yeah.
let the environment control your emotions. You be in charge of your emotions. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, sometimes that I might show my emotions would be like when I'm watching a movie, right? Like if I'm okay, like for example, I was watching One Piece. Are you familiar with anime?
I'm not, but I was just talking to somebody yesterday who was recommending me a few. So the one you watch is called One Piece.
So yeah, so that would be an anime television show, not like a movie or anything like that.
Okay.
It's a very, very long series, so it's kind of hard to get into. It's like 1,000 episodes at this point. But to be more general, right? So say you're watching a movie, and in the movie, there's a character in the movie that you're supposed to dislike, right? Like they're the villain, right? The author writes them in a way that they're very dislikable. So if you feel dislike towards the character, that enhances your interpretation of the movie. Or say you're watching like a rom com. Now, I'm not sure if you're a big fan of rom coms, but me, I've watched a few rom coms. I think they're funny.
Have you seen The Holiday?
I have seen The Holiday. Yeah.
Okay, that's my favorite rom-com. I would just watch that a week ago.
Right, right. So with rom coms, right, I'll watch them and I'll laugh I'll find it funny. I'll be happy when, they end up together. So I allow myself to feel this happiness because that's something that's in my control. Where Stoicism tells you to control your emotions, to not allow yourself to feel, bad or good or whatever, is things that are outside of your control, right? So, say someone is like insulting you, right? They might be acting like a villain in a movie that you like. Right? They might be acting like the villain in a movie, and you dislike that villain. That doesn't mean you have to feel dislike or hate towards them, right? That's something in your control. So, you can choose to not be bothered by them. You can choose to not allow them to control your hatred or your anger and just let it go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I interpret Stoicism. It's about choosing when you want to feel emotions, not, suppressing all emotions, but choosing when you want them out, right? If, you're watching a happy movie, feel free to feel happy. If you hear a funny joke, feel free to laugh. But, if you stub your toe, you don't have to let that keep you up at night, Exactly.
It kind of ties into mindfulness in a bit, where it's the whole thing of
you're right.
like learning how to self-regulate. Like, you are in charge of yourself. You're not in charge of everything else outside of you, because that's not what you're in charge of. But you have the full control to be in charge of how you react to a situation, how you respond to something. Like, again, we're tying back to like ruminating. You have full control of how you're going to let those thoughts dictate the rest of your day. You can let them just be a thought and let them pass, or you can sulk and sit in it, and then it ruins your day or the week. But it kind of like Stoicism and mindfulness kind of tying together, because it's just all about like you get to decide how you respond or you react to things, and like how that will dictate your day, your week, just the way you live.
Yeah, and depending on how you let it control your thoughts, depending on how you let it control your words and your actions, that's going to eventually be in control of your whole life. Because you've been letting the environment control you so much that it's dictated your thoughts, it's dictated your words, it's dictated your actions, it's dictated everything you are at this point. So start being in control of it now. Now, from the sounds of it, it sounds like you've been Stoic for quite a while, or at least you've been very familiar with Stoicism for quite a while.
I think
I could be wrong, but like...
Yeah, no, I would say like unintentionally Stoic. That's how I would, I guess, describe myself. I think just the way I grew up very fast. I've always been a bit more mature than my peers. And I think I just learned from a very young age, let things go. Like, I can dictate how things are going to affect me. And again, like, I haven't really done a whole lot of research myself in Stoicism. I haven't read a whole lot. I have some books, but not too much. But I guess unintentionally Stoic is how I would describe myself.
Yeah, like I'm no prude about it. You don't have to read a certain number of books or read any books at all to be a Stoic. Because the reason I bring that up is because it's the way we're talking about it can make Stoicism sound easy, like, oh, just be in control, right? But
Right.
When you're in the moment, right, when something like starts bugging you, right, it's easy to say just be in control, but it's gonna bug you, right? So Stoicism to me is also a skill. It's something you have to practice. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, I can't just be in control, I just can't do it. I tried and I just can't do it. It's a skill. You start out, like kind of like with me with mindfulness. It's a skill. I started out with almost no capacity to be mindful, and I'm slowly gathering more tools in mindfulness. Same thing with Stoicism. It's a skill. So if someone's listening to this and they're just like, oh, it's easy for them. Well, we've practiced a bit. We're familiar with it for a long time, so it becomes easier. But for someone just starting out, be in control of the little things and then work your way up. Eventually, things that used to bug you, like coworkers or bosses or friends or acquaintances, they won't bug you like they used to anymore. You'll be in control. You'll finally be the master of your own emotions, of your own life.
It's like,
All these are skills. All these are things you get better at, like empathy.
yeah, it's, I think like anything, it's like one little thing at a time. So for people listening, you're like, well, I've never been practiced Stoicism or, mindfulness. If there's a day where something bothers you, just try to be aware of it. Like, okay, something bothered me. And just start from there, just awareness. And then from there, you can start like building tools, whether you're reading up on it or just with yourself. Like, okay, how can I take a moment to acknowledge this, but also deep breath, let it go. And yeah, it takes time. It's a lot of work. It's definitely not easy. I know we're making it sound like it's just like, oh, you just read a book, here's the instruction. Yeah, it takes work. Like for me, that's why I say I'm unintentionally lived a stoic life. I've definitely had my very unstoic moments for sure. I'm not perfect by any means. So I'm not trying to say that, but I think just how I had to grow up, it's forced me to be that way. But like now I'm 26, so I've had like about 26 years of having to figure it out. So, but yeah, like just, I think with like anything, one little thing at a time, and then slowly it'll add on. And then from there, you'll be a place where you're like, oh, okay, I have a good understanding of how to go about this now.
Right. So, kind of to touch back on the what we talked about earlier, ethics itself is also a skill. The more you know about your ethics, what you think is right, what you know is right, what you feel is right, the more you practice it, the more you'll know what your personal ethics are. I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong, because this is still a field that's being studied to this day. People still are looking for what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil. So whatever you feel like fits with your personal ethics best, take that and run with it, right? Take that and get better at it. Be more consistent with it.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, be open to new information. Like me, I'm always open to be wrong. If suddenly, tomorrow someone busts my brain open with a whole bunch of knowledge about like utilitarianism or virtue ethics, or Eastern ethics like Taoism and things like that, I'm gonna use that information, incorporate it with my own philosophy, and be like, okay, I'm now like a Tao, or I'm now like a virtue ethicist, not a word, or like a utilitarian or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm open for new information. I'm open to be wrong, but I also practice ethics as often as possible. Whenever someone makes a decision, whenever you make a decision on what you do, practice your ethics. See if what you're doing is right. Does this follow my ethics of utilitarianism? Does this follow my ethics of this or that? And the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other topics that you wanted to touch up on as before we sign off on this episode?
So I guess I could talk a little bit about myself, if you don't mind, just like
Oh, no,
where
yeah.
I'm coming from.
Yeah. And then also I want to give you time to plug in yourself, because you're a streamer and all that. You want to share your platforms. But yes, I'd love to hear more about you.
Yeah, awesome. So I am Joey D. King. That is my screen name. That's how people know me by. I would be considered a virtual streamer. Colloquially, some people use the word VTuber because of my virtual avatar. Virtual streamers do a lot of things, and I want to sort of do a lot of things as well. I'm starting to get into podcasting, and I do a lot of video game stuff. I started streaming about in April. No, yeah. At the very end of April, April 27th was my first stream. So I've been streaming for a few months now, and I gotta say, it's been quite the journey. I started streaming with no knowledge about social media, networking, content creation. I started with nothing. All I could do was draw, and that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And even that wasn't even good enough, just being able to draw, because I could draw, but if you notice, my model moves around, right? It blinks and it talks and it tries to emote a bit. So it's not just good enough to be able to draw, but you need to be able to do this. You need to have this skill called rigging, which is taking the drawing, splitting it, and then being able to tell a program to translate a camera's movement into actual animated movement, which is its own skill.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when I started my journey, all I could do was draw. So I drew my character. But then I realized I had no knowledge on rigging. So I started watching videos and watching tutorials and practicing. And I had a bit of a timer, because the rigging software is this proprietary software called Live 2D. It only had a 42-day free trial. So after I learned my rigging, I downloaded it and I'm like, okay, I have 42 days to finish this model before I can't get it for free anymore. And then they're going to charge me $300. So I'm like, okay, time is ticking now. So I started working, and I would work like a madman. I would work and work and work, and then go to sleep, and then go to work, and back to work. And I would just keep going until this model that I have now perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to do in the streaming community. So I started with just being able to draw. Now I can rig. Then came content creation. That was certainly a journey. I was so nervous for my first stream that I made a practice account, and I could only stream for like 2 minutes. That's how bad it was, because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was doing it right. I could only stream for like 2 minutes. Now I could stream for several hours. It's been very eye-opening how enticing streaming has been. So after that, when I first started getting into streaming, and I've been doing a couple streams here and there, I realized that after every stream, I was so motivated and energized. Streaming gave me energy, and I was fully prepared to be drained at the end of each stream. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to work, come home, do a stream, and then be dead tired at the end of it because I work and then stream. But it was actually the opposite. I would come home dead tired from work, start streaming, and end the stream with so much energy. It was so motivating for me. So that's what kept me going and going. And that's how I've been able to stream these last couple months, doing all kinds of things. I got a really big stream coming up next week on the 13th of December. That's going to be my birthday stream. December 13th is Joey's birthday. I got some really cool stuff planned for that. So that's my story so far.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you.
That's cool. So for YouTube, do they just look you up on Joey D. King? Do you like Instagram or anything? Is there any other platforms that people can look you up on?
Yeah, so I am on, my main platform is YouTube. You can catch me on YouTube on Joey D. King channel. I also stream on Twitch, also Joey D. King channel, and V-Stream and Kick as well. I stream on all 4 platforms at the same time. You'll catch me on any one of them. You can catch me on TikTok on Joey D. King, and my Twitter is Joey D. King as well. So that's where I post a lot of my interesting thoughts and stuff like that. Any new announcements, you're going to catch me on Twitter posting about it. And that's where you can follow me.
Cool. I'm going to include all of the links on the show notes. That way, all my gamer people that want to go check Joey out, you can go look at that. It's not really a game that you stream. Well, I guess you could, but I have my Last of Us shirt because I knew you were going to be on. So I was like, I'll wear my video game shirt.
Last of Us. I'll definitely play that game on stream. I heard a lot of good things about it.
Oh, I love the game. They did a great job on the show. I'm a huge fan. So I was like, you know what? I'll wear my Last of Us shirt.
Well, I'll make sure to play it on stream. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Cool. Any last thoughts?
No, it's just great to be here. Great for having me. Had a very insightful conversation. Honestly, can't wait to see it when it comes out.
Yes, no, I'll definitely let you know when it comes out. Thank you for being on. I'm glad you reached out. I definitely learned a lot of stuff too, so I enjoyed this conversation. I hope everyone listening, you guys enjoyed it as well. We're going to be signing off now. It's kind of a little long episode, but it was really good. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Joey. And then everybody, we'll see you in the next one. All right, bye guys.